To another episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fanfiction Variety Podcast, where I read fan fiction to you. Whatever fan fiction it is, it might be good, might be bad, I don't know. It could be anything. And today I'm going back to Shinji and the Doctor for episode 2. The Sound of Distant Thunder, Part 1. The police box behind the Anna Millers. Earlier, in another place. The Doctor stood in the control room, staring into the air. The cloister bell started to ring. No, he said, and pulled the lever. His mind was in turmoil, but he knew this much. No one else would pay for his mistakes. No one else would suffer or die because of him today. This ended. Right here. Right now. It was a rift this time. A tear in reality, straight into the void, it looked like. Bit larger than Belgium. It was still forming on Mars, at the center of the casual breach, but soon enough it'd be heading straight to Earth, right on his trail. If he intercepted it in orbit, though. City of New Tokyo 3. August 2015. The Doctor had recently developed the habit of talking to himself. Hardly the healthiest of habits, he knew, but he just got so bored, not talking all the time now. He could feel it coming on before it started, an itching disapproval in the back of his mind. He sighed. Right, if you got something to say, just say it. He switched into a rough Lancashire accent. So you just left him there, did you? The Doctor went back to his own estuary English. Well, Rose's, actually. His apartment, yeah? Take it you have a better idea? Of course I do. His ninth incarnation crossed his arms. Not that that's saying much, mind you. The Doctor was standing on the roof of a one-level grocery store in the older section of town, where he'd rigged up a few more energy collectors. He'd kept them in passive mode ever since the attack on the train, of course, which was a bit like trying to fill a swimming pool with a thimble, really. But he couldn't risk the collector being the factor that had allowed that entity to manifest. Below him, his TARDIS sat in the alleyway behind the store, in between two dumpsters that belonged to the diner next door. What was that place called? It was one of the American ones, with the waitresses and the uniforms. He only seen the sign maybe 5 minutes ago, just flew straight out of his head. So what would you have had me do? The Doctor snapped. Just leave him there alone on the park bench in the middle of an invasion? I would have left him by the train. His third incarnation pulled up his cloak in irritation. The situation was under control. The authorities were on their way. You should have let the matter rest there. Oh, the authorities! The Doctor kicked an errant soda can across the rooftop. Because they so obviously have his best interests in mind, do they? And you do? The third retorted. Skulking about on the back roads, playing at therapist? The Doctor looked at him in disbelief. So you would have had me say nothing? Exactly. The Doctor shook his head. I can't believe I'm hearing this. Back me up here, will you? We couldn't have just left the boy there. His fifth incarnation said quietly. Not in that psychological state. It wouldn't have been right. Need I remind you, gentlemen, that this is not our reality? The third pointed his finger toward the sky, where, far above the city, the dimensional rift twisted and gyrated and skirted about in nonsensical patterns. Don't you think we've already done enough damage here? This state of permanence some of these islands are in, for one. The people of the planet blame it on that second impact event, but you know as well as I that it's the void, pouring in the energies of 1,000 dying universes, raising global temperatures. The biosphere here may never recover. The sooner we get the TARDIS operational and seal the rift, the better. See, that we can agree on. Which is why... Wait, hold on. Is that singing? He looked towards the second incarnation. That isn't you again, is it? The second shook his head and pointed upwards. The Doctor looked up. Above his head, above the city, An immense crystal, the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza, floated across the sky. It made a strange chiming noise as it moved, which sounded vaguely like the cries of a distant chorus. The doctor stood alone on the rooftop. Yeah, he swallowed. That doesn't look good. Part 2. The Bearer of Instructions. Nerve Headquarters, Central Dogma, underneath Tokyo 3. Post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as shell shock, traumatic war neurosis, and post-traumatic shock syndrome, a disease linked to anxiety. It can develop when people are severely harmed or experience something extremely upsetting. For PTSD to be diagnosed, the person must meet the following criteria. 1. Exposure to a traumatic event, or a series of traumatic events. 2. Re-experiencing of the event, either through nightmares or flashbacks. 3. Phobic avoidance of things which remind the person of the trauma. 4. Problems with sleeping, concentration, or anger management. 5. Decreased productivity due to all or some of the above symptoms. Copyright Free Hyper Dictionary, Japan, 2013. Shinji looked at the laptop screen. Well, he thought, at least that explains some things. He was sitting in the stairwell outside the Evangelion hangar, waiting for them to call him in. His school computer balanced on his knees. In the weeks since the train, this was the first piece of information he'd been able to find on that thing the doctor had mentioned. He wondered what you were supposed to do about this sort of thing once you've had it. Inside of Nerve Command, one of the smaller monitors displayed the live security feed from inside the stairwell. Misato kept in the corner of her eye. Ritsuko, that was to say, Dr. Ritsuko Akagi, PhD 2 or 3 times over, Commander, Director, Nerve Scientific Research and Development Division, noticed, of course. I've been meaning to ask, she said. Has he mentioned anything about the incident on the train? Misato sighed. Ah, word. Didn't I tell you? First thing he did when he woke up was ask me about Article 40. Clammed right up after I explained it to him. So he's trying to protect the people he met on the train. Bingo. Misato scratched between her ribs. Her scars started to itch again recently. Seriously, I don't know what the commander was thinking when he requested that part of the law. Didn't he know that it would just create issues like this? I'm sure he had his reasons at the time. Misato glanced back at the security monitor. One of the Ava techs stuck his head into the stairwell. Shinji started to pack up his things. It just seems unnecessary, that's all, burdening him with something else. Ritsuko gave her a small smile. You know that can't be helped. Yeah, well, scratching just made the scar itch worse, actually. She scratched it again anyway. I wonder about that sometimes. Of course you do, Ritsuko said. That's just human nature. The heart pulls us in its own direction, even as the brain tells us what must be done. Misato grunted. Classic Ritsuko. Getting all profound to avoid actually saying anything. Anyway, it's not like it really matters, right? We got pretty much the whole story from the other passengers. Excuse me, ma'am. Lieutenant Hugo looked up at her from his station. The pilot has boarded Ava Unit 1. Final checklist underway. Right. Misato turned back to the big picture. Game time. Her hand brushed the weathered metal cross around her neck. God forgive her, it was game time. The doctor paced around the TARDIS's control room, flipping the occasional switch, the sound of a dozen chattering voices in the background. He linked poor Katono's radio into the console. He hadn't had access to the higher encrypted frequencies, of course. Fortunately, he managed to dig up a broken coffee maker and a nearly fresh egg from the trash bins outside. A few simple circuits later, and he more or less had full access to all military wireless traffic in the city, not to mention 2 of the local pay-per-view movie channels, both of which unfortunately tended to focus on dodgier material, and not the funny kind either. Oi! The ninth said sharply. I'm not finished with you yet. The doctor sighed. Yeah, I was afraid of that. The ninth glared at him from the other side of the console. Well, he didn't really. He wasn't really there. Of course, none of his past incarnations were. They were just figments of the Doctor's imagination. Old memories and old selves given voice. A simple enough mental technique. The real trick, of course, was getting them to shut up again. The Doctor pulled up a scan on the console's monitor. So what's your problem now, eh? Am I wasting valuable time keeping an eye on the big floating crystal thing right above my head? Just one conversation isn't going to be enough to help that kid, the Knight said. Not with what he's been through. You know that, don't you? Yeah, well, one conversation's the best I got in me right now. The Doctor stopped and looked at his past self. Hold on, does that mean you don't agree with Mr. Ruffled Shirt back there? Of course not. So why'd you let him take over? I didn't, The Ninth folded his arms defensively. He might have threatened to hit me a bit. The Doctor groaned. I swear it's like having a kindergarten inside my head. The monitor screen bleeped. The Doctor looked at it. Oh, that's not good. That is the definition of not good. If we could get back to the matter at hand. Sorry, so what are you saying, that I should stay here and fix everything, even with the void and all? No. The Ninth leaned forward. I'm saying take him back with us. The Doctor stared at him. I'd be sealing off the rift behind me. He'd never be able to come back. He'd be leaving behind everyone he's ever known. Everyone he could have known. The Ninth snorted. That lot of good they're doing for him now, wouldn't you say? Fine. All right. The Doctor flipped another switch and set off another scan. At least he was pretty sure that's what that switch did. But what if the woman on the train was right? What if this Earth's dead without him? Then let it die. The Ninth's voice was cold as winter. Do you really think a world that puts children on the front lines deserves to be saved? Yes, the Doctor said without hesitation, and so do you. Don't even bother pretending otherwise. The Ninth grimaced and looked away. Yeah, all right. Just thought someone had to say it, that's all. The Doctor turned back to the console. Besides, even if I did take him back, they'd probably just find someone else to take his place. Like that girl. No matter what we do, we'd be leaving someone here to suffer. So stay then, his fourth incarnation said. The rift's not going anywhere. With a little effort, I'm sure I could have this whole thing wrapped up in a week. 1 week? You think? Oh, I said 1 week for me. For you, I would hazard more along the lines of a month. The Doctor rolled his eyes. Right, of course. Are you seriously considering this madness? The third had never been in the habit of raising his voice. He instead had a certain dangerous gleam in his eyes that the Doctor knew all too well. With two realities on the verge of tearing apart? The Doctor couldn't quite meet his gaze. We're just talking options, that's all. Nothing's been decided. Parallel worlds, the third said, disgust in his voice. Like gingerbread houses, everyone. Is meddling in the affairs of one universe not enough for the Time Lord victorious? The Doctor turned and stared at him, right in the eye. That's enough. Just because you failed that once doesn't mean I have to. And how convenient for you, eh? After all, let's call a card... And how convenient for you, eh? His seventh incarnation stood by the console. After all, let's call a card an ace, shall we? Finding a whole alternate world you need to fix at this moment? Nothing we're avoiding back in our own reality, are we? He knocked the handle of his umbrella against the central column. 4 times. The Doctor flinched. I didn't ask for this, you know, he said. I didn't go looking for this. Not this time. I just figured, oh hey, 14-year-old boy sitting by himself on the train. Big old cloud of angst over his head. Probably a girl, right? Or a boy. Or a sentient fungus, whichever. I can fix that, right? I'm a good listener. I could give advice. But no, he's got to be the latest recruit to the Joseph Kony Giant Robot Brigade. The seventh shrugged. True, which leaves a question. A woman's voice echoed over the radio. Evangelion Unit 1, launch! The Doctor turned to his past self. Hold that thought. I want to see this. He grabbed the radio off the console and ran outside. By the time the doctor had climbed back onto the rooftop, he could already hear sirens going off in the distance. There was the distant sound of hydraulics moving and earth shifting. Then the Evangelion simply popped out of the ground, about 7 or 8 blocks to the north, if the doctor had to guess. "Blimey," the doctor whispered to himself. "They don't do things by halves around here, do they?" It was massive. A huge armored giant, just short of the height of St. Paul's Cathedral. Not the first one, the second one. The one they had Chris Wren built after the fire. Well, or the exact reconstruction they put in as part of that mall on Europa. There seemed to be a certain litheness to its frame. That shouldn't have been possible with Earth-level materials. Well, unless they'd already figured out how to mass manufacture carbon nanotubes. The doctor would have to take a closer look to be sure. He felt an energy build up behind him. He swung around and saw the crystal hanging in the sky. Oh, no, 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 no. Get him out of there. Get out. Run. There was a flash of light. A vast beam of energy swept out from the angel, tore through a skyscraper, and blanketed the Evangelion. The armor started to boil away. Over the radio, the doctor heard Shinji scream like he'd been dropped into molten lead. There's nothing he could do. The doctor couldn't think of a single thing he could do. Couldn't deflect or mold the beam with the TARDIS. Didn't have the power for that yet. If he could get to the launch pad and do something, but he'd never make it in time. He couldn't. Something far away exploded. The Evangelion dropped back into the ground. The doctor stood on the rooftop, gripping the radio in his hand, and listened, as somewhere below the Earth's surface, the boy continued to scream in agony. Hey. You still listening? You better not have fallen asleep. I'm still reading this. You there. I can see you through the picture. These eyes. You see these eyes in these glasses? I can see you with them. You better be listening, because I ain't done yet. There's a difference between understanding an atrocity in theory and seeing it in practice. The doctor knew that lesson well, but every now and again it took something special to remind him of it. He sat in the TARDIS, staring at nothing in particular. He left the radio on. All around him, voices talked and planned and reported and informed. He didn't really pay attention to any of it. "They did it," the fifth said, his voice hollow. "They actually did it. They sent a child out to die." "Weren't they all children compared to us?" the doctor asked himself softly. "All the ones we let die for us, for our mistakes. Do we really get to say that we're any better?" "We never would have asked that of them," the fifth replied, a flash of steel in his eyes. "And we never would have left them to suffer, now if there was a single thing we could do to help it." In the background there was the screech of a fax machine. The radio picked it up and shunted it over to the console screen where, line by line, a document began to appear. Classified. Level Tiferet. Briefing. Mission Operation Yashima. Nervecom. Mission. The objective of the operation is to destroy enemy target designated Ramiel using JSSDF prototype positron cannon. At 18:30 hours tomorrow, Ava Unit 0, pilot Rei Ayanami, and Ava Unit 1, pilot Shinji Ikari, currently in medical recovery to be ready no later than 1700 hours, will be deployed to sniper position on Mount Fudagoyama. Utilizing the entire power output of the national grid of Japan, Unit 1 will neutralize the target's defenses and destroy it using the cannon. The following arrangements are being made at this time. The doctor rubbed his eyes. I should go. I really, really should go. Someone knocked 4 times. The doctor jumped to his feet around. Grammar. That might be right, that might be wrong. I don't know. It's just grammar. "Stop it!" he yelled, letting the rage into his voice. "You've made your point! Just stop!" But the seventh wasn't there. The doctor stood alone in the control room. There was another knock on the TARDIS's door. The doctor froze. He'd kept the perception filter up. He was sure of it. No one should have been able to notice the TARDIS, let alone... He picked up his screwdriver and went to the door. Carefully, he unlocked it and peered out into the night. There was no one there. There was, however, a small piece of paper lying on the ground by his feet. The doctor bent down and picked it up. In small, precise letters, in English, in a handwriting he didn't recognize, it said, "You know who you are." The doctor stared out into the early morning darkness. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Suppose that I do." Part 3. The Oncoming Storm. Mount Fudagoyama, outside of Tokyo 3. He could feel the pain in his own arms, the heat rising from what remained of the mountain the enemy had burned through to reach him. Inside the entry plug within Eva Unit 1, Shinji hugged himself tightly. He could hear Misato and his father arguing about something over the radio. He wasn't really listening. I'm probably gonna have those flashback things about this, aren't I? He thought. If I live through this. He couldn't take this anymore. He just couldn't. There was a burst of static from the radio. The chatter in the background went silent. A soft voice said, "Shinji! Shinji, can you hear me?" Shinji raised his head. "Doctor?" he asked in surprise. City sewers, Tokyo 3. "Shinji, listen to me." The doctor finished wiring the power line from the TARDIS into the main transformer. He held the screwdriver up to the connection. Radio gripped in between his shoulder and the side of his face. "Your friend's very clever, but the plan isn't gonna work. It's seen you coming. It's generating a hyper-compressed, positively charged electric field around its heart. Those positrons are going to bounce right off unless we do something." "Do what?" Shinji sounded a bit dazed. The doctor scrambled back up the sewer ladder, out the open manhole cover and back onto the street, where he sprinted for the TARDIS back in the alleyway. "I'm going to send you some rift energy through the city power grid. If your..." He didn't really want to say gun. "Emitter works the way I think it does. It should reverse the polarity on the ions long enough for you to get through. But that's not the important thing." "It isn't?" The doctor ran back into the TARDIS. He gripped the edge of the console, trying to catch his breath. "The important thing is," he gasped out, "I spent most of today trying to talk to it, trying to get it to leave on its own, tried everything I could think of. Radio waves, psychic broadcasts, mauve semaphore flags. Either it's not listening or it's too alien for even me to communicate with right now. It's left you with no choice." "Why does that matter?" "Because you're a human being, not a weapon." "Because you're a human being, not a weapon!" The doctor threw the switch. There were many different eyes watching Japan from above. This particular satellite had an excellent wide-angle view of the islands. The camera watched as, for the briefest of moments, the lights of Japan flickered back on as the excess power jumped the switches. The TARDIS, Tokyo 3. The lights in the control room dimmed. "I'm sorry!" the doctor shouted. "This is the best I could do right now! It's all up to you! If you could think of just one person in this city that's worth shaving! Just one! Just take the shot!" Outside Tokyo 3, Shinji thought of Toji and Kensuke and Misato and even Ayanami. He thought about the candy bar. He reached out and took the controls. The Eva started to crawl forward towards the half-melted rifle. There was a burst of static. The nerve command channel came back on. Shinji tried to wipe the tears out of his eyes. "One more shot," he said, his teeth chattering. "Please, just let me take one more shot." Tokyo 3, First Municipal Middle School, late August 2015. Strange how the world worked, Shinji thought. He stared out the window of his classroom at the corpse of the angel in the distance, nestled amid the cranes and skyscrapers where it had fallen. Less than a week before, he'd been sitting in the Ava, waiting for the targeting system to align, almost certain that he was going to die. Misato had let him sleep in the next day. After that, everything had gone back to normal. He guessed that he had sort of expected everything to end, like in a movie. Something big and dramatic happens, the characters walk off into the sunset, fade to black. Instead, life just went on. If you can hear that, someone's riding a motorcycle outside. I can hear it. I don't know if you guys can hear it. He guessed that he had sort of damn it. Ah. Class stand! Hikari, the class representative, snapped. The other students rose from their seats. Shinji, late to react, stumbled to his feet. There's been a change in plans. Mr. Koike, the literature teacher, addressed them from the front of the room. I'm happy to say that we finally managed to find a second-year English teacher. He comes highly recommended from the university at Cambridge, so I expect that he will receive your full respect and attention. A sudden sense of dread swept over Shinji. Somehow, he knew exactly where this was going. Oh no, he whispered under his breath. Lessons will commence during the next period daily for the foreseeable future, until a permanent schedule has been devised, Mr. Koike continued. That said, it is my honor to introduce you to Mr. John Smith. Mr. Smith? Good evening, class. The doctor grinned. Are we sitting comfortably? And that was the end of that part. Thank you for listening to this. Thank you for listening to me read something for however long this video is. I don't even know how long it is. If you liked what you heard, please smack that like button with your mouse and click that subscribe button for more. You might get me reading a fan fiction. You might get a video of me just playing a game and just rambling sometimes, just shutting up and not really doing anything useful. But hey, I'm just do plays games. So what do you expect? I'm just do plays games or reads fan fiction. What are you expecting? Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Like,